and that's the Orpheus and Eurydice. No one knows for sure how Poussin came up with the subject, and here's a detail that shows you the man entwined by a giant python that has killed it. But what Diderot appreciated was how the serene landscape in the background was this extraordinary body of calm water, the men playing a game of mora, you can hardly make them out here, fishermen, the wonderful buildings in the landscape, how the serene landscape of the background serves as a foil for the dead figure in the foreground and the responses the sight of death sets in motion. As he wrote, "From the tranquil travelers in the background to this last terrifying spectacle of the figure encircled by a giant snake, what an immense psychological distance is covered. And within that, what a sequence of different passions is laid out before you. Such are the scenes one must know how to imagine if one wants to be a landscape painter. One sees in them all the charms of nature, as well as the sweetest or most terrible incidents in life." What Diderot recognized was that Poussin's landscapes are anything but records of scenic spots. In fact, they include no demonstrable topographical views. Rather, they take us to a time and a place and involve us in a story taken from mythology or ancient biblical history that inspires reflection. Unlike his Dutch contemporaries, such as Jacob van Ruysdael, and here's one of the Met's great Ruysdaels on the right, Poussin's paintings conjure up a mythic past rather than record a lived-in present. This was not only because of the deep fascination educated people had in classical antiquity in the 17th century, but because myth involves archetypes, and it suggests associations. No wonder that the symbolist German painter Arnold Böcklin and the Italian metaphysical painter Giorgio de Chirico found Poussin's work so engaging, and so, we might add, did Picasso, Matisse, and Balthus. What de Chirico called the primordial feeling of prehistory is exactly what Poussin explores in the great Blind Orion Searching for the Rising Sun, which I consider one of the greatest Old Master paintings in the Metropolitan Museum. Of it, the 19th century British critic William Hazlitt wrote, "It breathes the spirit of the morning, its moisture, its repose, its obscurity, waiting for the miracle of light to kindle it into smiles. The whole is, like the principal figure in it, a forerunner of the dawn." Well, forerunner of the dawn is a phrase he lifted directly from his friend John Keats, who, like Wordsworth, was an admirer of Poussin's landscapes. Hazlitt then remarked, "This great and learned man might be said to see nature through the glass of time." And this is really the leitmotif of the exhibition, nature through the glass of time. It suggests that Poussin's landscapes are first and foremost profoundly poetic creations. And for those who spend any time in the galleries upstairs, I promise you'll be rewarded. This is not to say that his paintings are not based on nature, quite the opposite. We know he made excursions into the Roman countryside with his colleagues, including Claude Lorraine, and drew from nature. He was also a keen student of the science of optics and of the natural sciences. And in this quite extraordinary landscape from the Getty Museum, he has set out these extraordinary reflections in the water based on his understanding of the optics of reflections. Remember that this is the age of Galileo, and Poussin's most constant Italian patron, Cassiano del Pozzo, was a leading member of the first scientific academy in Europe, the Accademia dei Lincei, which initiated the examination of plants and insects under magnification. Poussin was also a reader of Leonardo da Vinci's observations on nature. Cassiano del Pozzo owned a manuscript, and he employed Poussin to make illustrations for them. A copy of Leonardo's treatise on painting was published in 1651, based on the illustrations made by Poussin. I have an example of it in the exhibition. At the same time, how do you go from an economical drawing done on site, such as the one on the left, to this extraordinary and glorious and rich neatly articulated landscape on the right. Or from this no less economical sketch done with the brush and ink to the landscape of St. Matthew seen before this landscape littered with the monuments of antiquity. Well, Poussin's contemporaries had an answer. It was the artist's sublime imagination. The exhibition includes a rich selection of Poussin's drawings, as well as a stunning group of studies after nature that used to be ascribed to him, but that are today thought to be by one or more artists working in his circle. Whether they're Dutch, whether they're French, whether they're Italian, is disputed. I myself am not totally convinced that all of them should be excised from Poussin's oeuvre, and that's one of the fascinations of the exhibition. For example, this marvelous study of two birches seems to me to have much to do with the two trees, this one broken, stump leaned over, that we see in a painting from the Prado of St. Jerome in Penitence. At the very least, Poussin must have done studies of a similar kind. Now, we all know that scholars are sometimes guilty of imposing an artificial uniformity on an artist's work, one that falsifies a more complex and varied reality. And the matter is especially complex with someone like Poussin, who began his career in Rome as a disciple of Titian and the Venetian tradition of pastoral landscapes. And I think the first two galleries of this exhibition, in which you will encounter somebody who really revived the sensuous world of Titian in the most extraordinary way and painted paintings of a really pretty heady eroticism, ends up, after 1640, with these landscapes in which we find nature ennobled and that carry and that have philosophical as well as poetic associations. It's an extraordinary trajectory for any artist. Like a great poet, Poussin creates his own world, and he invites us imaginatively to inhabit it with him. Let me take an example. Sort of political allegory for our time, if you like. The subject is taken from the Roman author Plutarch, and it concerns a general of 4th century BC Athens, Phocion. He was a figure of great severity and moral rectitude. He supported an unpopular policy, and for this was condemned on a false charge of treason to drink hemlock. It was decreed that his body could not even be buried on Athenian soil. Poussin shows his widow breaking the law by gathering up his ashes following cremation, while a servant keeps watch. In the distance is the city of Megara. The point of the story is the noble act of Phocion's widow and the hasty misjudgment of those who condemned the general, whose reputation was eventually rehabilitated. No one had previously illustrated this story, and much has been written about its choice by Poussin. Did he intend the story as a comment on the civil war in France, known as the Fronde, that affected the political fortunes of his friends and patrons? We have a whole group of letters from Poussin that make it quite clear that he was aware and followed the political events of his day, and the mid-17th century was a moment of extraordinary turmoil. Or was the picture meant as a more general lesson about Stoic principles in the face of the unpredictability of life? Stoicism was a leading philosophy of Europe's intelligentsia, and Poussin was fully conversant with its ideals of detachment and resignation to those forces in life that we cannot control, what he called the storms of fortune, and epitomized in his astonishing paintings of men battling storms. What strikes me as truly remarkable, however, is the way the action of the main characters, although placed in the foreground, ends up by becoming merely part of a much broader narrative. Indeed, it seems only a minor detail in the picture.